Professor Ota, thank you very much indeed for the welcome. It's a privilege to be here, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about the Japan Social Development Fund, with which I've been associated since about 2004. I should start by just noting that those of us who have been working with Japan find the overall picture of Japanese aid to be quite worrying. The total aid flows from Japan rose steadily until the 1990s, but since then the total aid flows have been tending to decline. And if you look at the per capita figures, you can see that Japan was close to the top of countries giving in aid per capita in about the 1990s, and it's steadily been declining in aid per capita, and most recently it has even been overtaken by the United States. And one of the standard ways of looking at ODA is to judge the progress that countries are making towards the international target of 0.7% of gross national income. And again, you can see that Japan has always been, was near the top 10 years ago and has been steadily declining, while other countries have been heading slowly but steadily towards the 0.7% target. And again, on this criterion, the USA has actually overtaken Japan. However, I'm pleased to say that today my emphasis is going to be on good news rather than bad news about Japanese aid. Japan is a major contributor to the World Bank, and it contributes both to IDA, the major concessionary funding arm of the World Bank, and to trust funds, which are funds that are received by the bank and given out by the bank as grants in line with the agreements with the donor. And as you can see, Japan's contributions to trust funds have been steadily increasing since 2007. In fact, they were still more than they were in 2006. And contributions to the Japan Social Development Fund in particular have been rising steadily. Japan made very, very large, generous contributions to the Japan Social Development Fund at the very start of the fund in its first 2 years. And since then, it's fluctuated, but in 2010, Japan's contributions to the Japan Social Development Fund were the highest that they had been since 2003. So, what is the Japan Social Development Fund? It was a fund that was established in the year 2000 following the East Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s. And the aim of the fund was to provide grants supporting innovative social programs in eligible countries. And the projects under the Japan Social Development Fund are expected to meet 4 key criteria. Firstly, they're expected to respond to the needs of marginalized or disadvantaged groups. And people often ask us, what exactly do you mean by a marginalized group? And the best way of explaining it is to say we have a committee called the JSDF Steering Committee, who make decisions on grants from the fund. And the members of this committee say it is not enough to say that a project is there to help the poor. There are all sorts of things that can help the poor. The aim of JSDF is to help people who are exceptionally badly off, even amongst the poor. They may be exceptionally badly off because of their location, somewhere very remote. It may be because of age, very old or very young, or it may be because of gender, it may be ethnicity. We know that disadvantage can take very many different forms, but the aim of JSDF is to help groups who are exceptionally badly off. And secondly, JSDF grants are supposed to provide direct benefits to the members of these groups. JSDF does not fund training programs, it does not fund research work, it does not fund monitoring and evaluation studies. All of those are undoubtedly worthwhile activities, but they do not provide direct benefits to the target group. Indirect benefits? Oh yes, but the members of the groups do not benefit directly from that kind of activity. So we expect any JSDF project must be directly beneficial. Thirdly, and very important, JSDF projects are expected to be innovative. Innovation, again, can take many forms. It's very rare that you come across a project which is doing something that is completely new to the world. But JSDF has supported many projects which have been completely new in a particular country, or which have supported a new way of doing things, perhaps something that was previously done by government, having it done by NGOs or civil society organizations. When somebody proposes a project to us, we ask them to tell us, why is this innovative? What is new? And fourthly, and very important to this particular talk, is that the fourth aim of JSDF is to build the capacity of local governments, non-government organizations, and civil society organizations. Just to give you a few quick statistics on JSDF, these are through to the end of June 2010, which is the World Bank's financial year. $491 million actually contributed by Japan over the 10 years. 222 projects approved, 422 million in approved grants. And of those grants, 39% were directly implemented by civil society organizations. What that means is that there is a grant directly from the World Bank to a CSO or an NGO, not going through government, not going through any other organization. I will come back to this because this is something that is very unusual about the Japan Social Development Fund. But in addition to that 39%, in total, 76% of all grants involve civil society organizations directly or indirectly in implementation. It can be indirect when the World Bank gives a grant to a government and the government then gives an on-grant to a civil society organization. So CSOs have had a very major role in the Japan Social Development Fund. You probably can't read this very well. I'm afraid it's a rather detailed slide, but it's just giving 3 examples of JSDF grants. The first one is a grant to Vietnam. In fact, this is a grant looking at early childhood care, which was piloting a new kind of early childhood care approach in 147 villages in 3 of Vietnam's poorest provinces. So it was innovative in that it was introducing a new approach to childhood care. It was aiming at the poorest provinces, and it had major impacts on improving children's weight, and it involved 80,000 people attending parental education sessions. This second project is one that I know very well. This is in southern India, in Tamil Nadu. This was a very innovative project, experimenting with new ways of addressing poverty in the poorest. It aimed to address the poorest groups in the poorest villages, in the poorest districts in the province of Tamil Nadu. And the team who were implementing this project were trying to identify new ways both of identifying poverty and of addressing poverty. Just to give you one example of one of the things that they did, they were very worried. They were going to give grants to help poor people improve their livelihoods. Grants which might, for example, allow a poor woman to have 1 cow. But they were very worried about giving the money to a village and how the village was going to spend the money. So they introduced a process of transparent procurement. When the village wanted to buy a cow to give to a poor woman, they would put up notices throughout the village saying, inviting people to propose a cow to be purchased. And then when different people who owned cows offered their cows, all the offers would be put up in the village again, so that all the villagers could see who had offered what cow and at what price. And then there was about a 2-week period in which all the villagers were allowed to comment on the bids. And people knew, this man's cows are lousy, this man's cows are really good. If he's offering that cow, that's a really good price. And then the village procurement committee would sit down and decide which cow to purchase. And then again, they would put up their decision in public on the walls of the houses in the village, so that everybody could see what the decision was and whether the decision reflected the advice they had been given. And of course, they could also check that that really was the cow that was purchased. And this very, very transparent approach to procurement was then replicated throughout Tamil Nadu on a number of different projects, and even in other states in India. So it was a very innovative idea and very widely adopted. This is a third project, a very different example. This was in Sri Lanka. This was a project to introduce a new approach to community-driven development. This was an example, a good example of the way JSDF often works, because the World Bank was quite keen to introduce community-driven development projects in Sri Lanka. And the Sri Lankan government was very reluctant. They said they didn't want to borrow for this. It had never been tried in Sri Lanka. It was very risky. They weren't sure it would work. So the World Bank went back to them and said, okay, how about we try this under a JSDF grant as a pilot? If it doesn't work, you don't have to repay the money, obviously, so you've not lost anything. And the government said, okay, yes, if it's not going to cost us anything, we'll try it. They had a JSDF grant to look at community-driven development. It was extremely successful, and the Sri Lankan government were subsequently very enthusiastic and borrowed substantially from IDA in order to promote community-driven development throughout Sri Lanka. So a big replication effect in the country. We wanted to look at the impact of JSDF. This is because JSDF has now been in existence for 10 years. There's going to be a celebration of JSDF's first 10 years of experience in Washington in January. And the JSDF team wanted to assemble information on the experience and lessons learned by the program. So myself and 2 colleagues were commissioned to do a study to look at the results of JSDF's work with civil society organizations over the last 10 years and the impact of these studies. We carried out this study using both existing material, and we did 8 new case studies. And we also looked at the Japan Social Development Fund's experience within the broader context of the bank's engagement with civil society. Because, of course, the World Bank deals with civil society at many levels. At the global level in Washington, the World Bank has consultations with representatives from all over the world when it introduces new strategies. Whenever there's an annual meeting, there are delegations from NGOs and civil society to talk with the bank about worldwide strategy issues. At the country level, which is the major focus of the World Bank's work, there's a lot of discussion with civil society organizations on poverty reduction strategy plans, on country assistance strategies. Sorry, that's the PRSPs and CASs that you see in the acronyms. I'm afraid the World Bank is a terrible organization for acronyms. But in addition to these broad strategic consultations at global level,